Before we begin Chapter 7, we need to actually finish Chapter 6. Last time we saw Nick got a big idea. Today we'll see what that big idea is, and then we'll get to see in Chapter 7 it put into action. The big idea. By the time he had run down the street and up the steps and through the door and upstairs to his room, it wasn't just a big idea. It was a plan, a whole plan. Just begging for Nick to put it into action. And action was Nick's middle name. The next day after school, the plan began. Nick walked into the penny pantry store and asked the lady behind the counter for a Frindle. She squinted at him. A what? A Frindle, please, a black one. And Nick smiled at her. She leaned over closer and aimed one ear at him. You want what? A Frindle. And this time Nick pointed at the ballpoint pens behind her on the shelf. A black one, please. The lady handed Nick the pen. He handed her the 49 cents and said thank you, and left the store. 6 days later, Janet stood at the counter of the penny pantry. Same store, same lady. John had come in the day before, and Pete the day before that, and Chris the day before that, and Dave the day before that. Janet was the 5th kid that Nick had sent there to ask that woman for a Frindle. And when she asked, the lady reached right for the pens and said, blue or black? Nick was standing one aisle away at the candy racks, and he was grinning. Frindle was a real word. It meant pen. Who says Frindle means pen? You do, Nicholas. Half an hour later, a group of serious 5th graders had a meeting in Nick's playroom. It was John, Pete, Dave, Chris, and Janet. And add Nick, and that's 6 kids, 6 secret agents. They held up their right hands and read the oath. It means a promise. The oath Nick had written out. From this day on and forever, I will never use the word pen again. Instead, I will use the word Frindle, and I will do everything possible so others will too. And all 6 of them signed the oath with Nick's Frindle. The plan would work. Thanks, Mrs. Granger. Okay, now that we've heard the plan from Chapter 6, we can get into watching it actually happen. 7. Word Wars. School was the perfect place to launch a new word, and since this was a major historical event, Nick wanted it to begin in exactly the right class, 7th period language arts. Nick raised his hand first thing after the bell rang and said, Mrs. Granger, I forgot my Frindle. Sitting 3 rows away, John blurted out, I have an extra one you can borrow, Nick. Then John made a big show of looking for something in his backpack. I think I have an extra Frindle. I told my mom to get me 3 or 4. I'm sure I had an extra Frindle in here yesterday, but I must have taken it... Wait. Oh, yeah, here it is. And then John made a big show of throwing it over to Nick, and Nick missed it on purpose. Then he made a big show of finding it. Mrs. Granger and every kid in the class got the message loud and clear. That black plastic thing that Nick borrowed from John had a funny name, a different name, a new name, Frindle. There was a lot of giggling, but Mrs. Granger turned up the power in her eyes and swept the room into silence, and the rest of the class went by, according to plan. Her plan. As everyone was leaving after class, Mrs. Granger said, Nicholas, I'd like to have a word with you. And she emphasized the word, word. Nick's mouth felt dry and he gulped, but his mind stayed clear. He walked up to her desk. Yes, Mrs. Granger? It's a funny idea, Nicholas, but I will not have my class disrupted again. Is that clear? Her eyes were lit up, but it was mostly light, not much heat. Idea? What idea? Asked Nick, and he tried to make his eyes as blank as possible. You know what I mean, Nicholas. I'm talking about the performance that you and John gave at the start of class. I am talking about this. And she held up her pen, an old maroon fountain pen with a blue cap. But I really didn't have a Frindle with me, said Nick, amazed at his own bravery. And hiding behind his glasses, Nick kept his eyes wide and blank. Mrs. Granger's eyes flashed and then narrowed, and her lips formed a thin, hard line. She was quiet for a few seconds, and then she said, "I see." "Very well. Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss today, Nicholas. You may go." "Thanks, Mrs. Granger," said Nick, and he grabbed his backpack and headed for the door. And when he was just stepping into the hallway, he said, "And I promise I won't ever forget my Frindle again. Bye." So that's interesting. Nick and Mrs. Granger seem to both understand each other. Nick is going to keep saying Frindle instead of pen, and Mrs. Granger knows this, but they didn't actually say that to each other. She said, what did she say? It's a funny idea, but I will not have my class disrupted again. So as I read, I'm thinking about what's her reasoning for being bothered by this? She thinks that he's doing it to disrupt the class, to slow class down, to make class about something else. And why is Nicholas doing it? I feel like maybe she's kind of right. Like, Nicholas wants to be a disruption. He wants to have fun. He wants to scramble things up a little bit. So maybe she's not wrong to think that. Well, we'll find out what comes of it when we read chapter 8, Mightier Than the Sword.